No one knew much about him. He didn't come from a famous family, nor did he have an impressive past. He was just SEMAÍAS, a name among many, at a time when the people of Judah were somewhat lost, trying to figure out what to do now that King Solomon had died. The throne passed to his son Rehoboam, but the crown seemed heavier than he could bear. The people were divided, suspicious, and the atmosphere was tense. It was in this unstable setting that Shemaiah appeared, not as a warrior or a palace advisor, but as someone who carried something different. It is not known for certain where he was born or when, but perhaps that doesn't matter so much. What matters is that at the right moment, he was the voice that needed to be heard. Subscribe to the channel for more exciting Bible stories and turn on notifications so you don't miss any videos. If this content touches your heart and you want to support us, feel free to click on the Thanks a Lot button. All help is welcome and makes a big difference. He was not a politician, but he knew things. He knew because God spoke to him. And when he spoke, Shemaiah listened, not as one who merely hears, but as one who carries the responsibility of every word. While the cities of Judah were in turmoil and news of rebellions came like distant thunder, he waited. He did not rush to show off, nor did he try to put himself in the center. But when the time came, he spoke, and there was no ignoring him. In those days, the new king was ready to fight. He wanted to prove his strength, reconquer the entire kingdom, and show that he was not weak, as they said. The army was already arming itself, and the people were preparing for conflict. But before the first spear was thrown, Shemaiah entered the scene, not with shouts, but with a firm command. God had spoken, and Shemaiah, without trembling, delivered the message. And that's when something surprising happened, because, against all odds, Rehoboam listened. Imagine the scene. 20,000 soldiers ready to march. Shields raised, spears sharpened, generals already studying maps, dust rising from the fields around Jerusalem. The people awaiting war as one awaits an inevitable storm. And in the midst of it all, an ordinary man, without a sword, without an army, with only a message from on high. Do not fight against your brothers. Rehoboam could have ignored him. He could have had Shemaiah arrested. He could have gone ahead with his plan and done what so many kings had done before him, rely on force. But something about that warning paralyzed him. Perhaps it was the tone. Perhaps it was the steady gaze, or perhaps he felt the weight of those words beating louder than any war drum. And there, with everyone expecting the worst, Rehoboam backed down. He ordered the soldiers to return home. The spears were lowered. The noise ceased. The people, who were already preparing for mourning, saw something rare happen. Peace came without battle. It was as if God had put an invisible brake on a runaway car. This obedience, this moment of pause, was a respite amid so much tension. But as we know, peace does not last long when the king's heart begins to swell again. Over time, repentance turned into forgetfulness, and forgetfulness turned into pride. Rehoboam began to feel invincible, as if that deliverance were his own doing. And then, as expected, came the blow. Not from the north, not from the rebel tribes, but from a much more distant place. From lands where pyramids touch the sky and pharaohs march with arrogance in their eyes. From there, a new threat arose. It was Egypt that was now approaching, and not with trade caravans or ambassadors offering peace agreements. It was Shishak, the pharaoh, with his heavy army, his chariots, and that old thirst for conquest stamped on his face. He marched confidently, as if Jerusalem were just another city to cross off the map. The people were in shock. No one expected this. Not so soon, not after what God had done. But the problem was that, between obedience and the Egyptian attack, a lot had changed. Rehoboam and his leaders had strayed from God. They abandoned the paths they had promised to follow. Pride took over, and with it came mistakes. So when Shishak appeared, surrounding cities and destroying everything in his path, it wasn't just political punishment. It was a divine response. And in the midst of that chaos, guess who shows up again? Shemaiah. He arrives with words that weigh more than lost gold. He didn't come to calm things down. He came to explain, "You have forsaken the Lord, so he has also given you into the hands of Shishak." Cold, direct, no beating around the bush. No one there could pretend they didn't understand. The message was as clear as the cloudless sky before a storm. But what is most impressive is what happens next. Rehoboam listens again. And this time, instead of reacting with anger, he bows down. He humbles himself. He acknowledges his mistake. The leaders do the same. A silent surrender, not to Egypt, but to the God they had forsaken. It was at that moment, in that exact moment of repentance, that something changed. Shemaiah spoke again, and what he said not only turned the city's fate around, but also revealed that not all punishment comes to destroy. Shemaiah stood up once more with the same firm posture as before and said, "They have humbled themselves, so I will not destroy them completely." It was like a ray of light entering a dark room. God saw their repentance and decided not to wipe Judah off the map. But that didn't mean everything would go back to normal. Not this time. Shishak entered Jerusalem with his soldiers and took almost everything of value. The treasures of the temple, the golden shields that Solomon had made, the royal coffers, everything became spoils in the hands of the Pharaoh. The city remained standing but wounded. Rehoboam remained on the throne, but without the glory he had inherited. It was as if God was saying, "You will live, but you will remember." The image was harsh. The temple, once resplendent, was now empty. The streets, once full of pride, were silent, and the people who thought they were safe learned that true danger comes not only from armies, but from a heart far from God. And Shemaiah? He didn't show up to clean the floor or comfort the king. He was a prophet, not a diplomat. His role was to announce, and he did so with precision. At that moment, he had already accomplished more than many kings would in a lifetime. But God still had more to show, because while everyone's eyes were on the lost gold, no one noticed that another treasure was being revealed there. A lesson written not with ink, but with loss. And the one who began to record this new phase, this turning point in history, was Shemaiah himself. Yes, in addition to being a prophet, he was also a writer. And what he recorded during this period showed that God never corrects for pleasure, but for purpose. Even with Jerusalem plundered and its treasures taken, there was still something that Egypt could not take away: mercy. Shemaiah returned with another message, and this time it was laden with something the people no longer expected to hear. God had seen Rehoboam's broken heart. He had seen his repentance, even if it was late, even if it was mixed with fear, and he decided to spare them. Not everything, but enough. The city would not be destroyed, the people would not be exterminated. Instead, they would live under a kind of light rule as servants of Egypt, a living reminder that they had chosen to walk away from the Lord. It was like a scar. It doesn't kill, but it leaves a mark. Rehoboam, who once walked with his head held high, now walked more slowly. The same arrogance was no longer heard in the corridors of the palace, and the temple, even empty, was still a temple. It was still a place where God spoke, and Shemaiah was still there. Not as a hero, nor as someone seeking glory, but as an attentive servant. He did not walk with pomp. He did not make a fuss. But his words carried weight, and his presence carried that silent tension of one who walks with messages from heaven. And more than that, he wrote. He wrote carefully, in detail. Every word, every record of events was not just history. It was a warning, it was teaching, and that is where the figure of the prophet changes. He ceases to be just a messenger and becomes a chronicler, a guardian of memory, one who writes not for himself, but for those who would come after him. What Shemaiah began to record from that moment on would become part of a book that no one expected. And those pages revealed that not every prophet uses only his mouth to speak. Some use ink. SEMAÍAS, after being the voice that stopped the war, explained the punishment, and announced mercy, also became the scribe of difficult days. While the people tried to rebuild their routine and digest everything that had happened, he sat in a corner, perhaps by the light of a lamp, and wrote, line by line, like someone drawing what the eyes can no longer see. It was not poetry, nor lamentation. It was living history. He recorded the acts of Rehoboam, the mistakes, the consequences, the moments when God spoke and the people listened, and the many others when the people simply turned their backs. What he wrote was not only for his generation, it was a mirror for the future. These writings, mentioned in the scriptures as the records of the prophet Shemaiah, have not come down to us in complete form. But the fact that they are mentioned says a lot. It means that he was not just a man who spoke for God. He was someone who understood the weight of time. He knew that forgetting was dangerous, that remembering could save. And there, between the walls of the battered city, between the columns of the empty temple, Shemaiah wrote as if he were building something invisible, something that would span centuries. His words were not golden, but they were true. They did not make the king shine, but they showed reality without makeup. While Rehoboam grew old on the throne and the people tried to find some balance, the prophet scribe remained steadfast, observing everything with that gaze that seems to see beyond the surface. And although the people did not know it, the silence that surrounded Shemaiah was not disinterest, it was preparation. Because after recording everything, he simply disappeared. Shemaiah, the man who spoke to kings, who prevented war, who explained judgment, who wrote history with his own hands, disappeared from the narrative like someone turning off a lamp at the end of the night. No one knows how or when he died. There is no record of a farewell, no tribute, no grave. It was as if he had done what he needed to do and then simply vanished. But that's the thing, because even without applause, without a stage, without a grand finale, his presence continued to linger. You know when someone says something so powerful that even after they're gone, you can still hear it in your head. That was it. Shemaiah was gone, but what he said continued to echo. The decisions he influenced shaped the future of Judah. That was averted, the repentance that was rested in time, the punishment that was turned into a warning, all of this marked not only a generation, but created a path where before there was only a precipice. And even after his name stopped appearing, the marks of his mission remained engraved in history like a scar after healing. He didn't need to be present to remain part of the story. God used Shemaiah in such a precise way that his appearance at the right moments was enough to change the course of everything. And even without a narrated ending, the silence around him screams. It screams that perhaps the greatest role of anyone is not to appear all the time, but to appear at the right moment. But that raises a question, one of those questions that keeps hammering away at the mind of anyone who looks back carefully. Why him? Why did God choose such a simple man of unknown origin to deal with kings, armies, and such big decisions? And then we begin to realize that his impact is measured not only by what he did, but also by who listened to him, because Rehoboam was not exactly the kind of king who listened to advice easily. Rehoboam inherited the throne from Solomon, the wisest man who ever lived in Israel. But wisdom, as we know, is not hereditary. Rehoboam wanted to prove his worth. He wanted to show strength, dominance, leadership, but in the wrong way. He ignored the advice of the elders, despised the people, and acted as if power were a shield against consequences. So when Shemaiah appeared with that first divine message, everyone thought it would come to nothing. A simple prophet facing a proud king, surrounded by soldiers. But then came the shock. Rehoboam listened. He lowered his weapons. He called off the attack. That alone was a miracle. Because no prophet likes to confront authority, not because they are afraid, but because they are almost always ignored. What happened there was rare, not only because the king listened, but because the whole people felt the weight of that order. No one died, no battle took place, and all because one man had the courage to say what needed to be said, and another, even though full of pride, had the humility to listen, even if only for a moment. Later, when Rehoboam made another mistake, Shemaiah's voice still had power. He spoke about punishment, and again the king listened. He humbled himself, he acknowledged his mistake. The relationship between the two was not one of friendship or political partnership. It was something deeper, respect for the truth, and perhaps fear of what might happen if he ignored it again. But respecting someone for a moment does not mean changing your heart forever, because the people, even seeing everything that had happened, continued to stumble. And this collective stumbling gradually made way for a new reality, one that would depend no longer on strength or name, but on what no one could see. Because Shemaiah's true legacy was not in the size of the crowd that followed him, nor in the miracles he performed. Shemaiah's true legacy lived in what remained after he was gone. The people of Judah, even though their faith was faltering and they were straying from the path, were still standing. The city still existed. The temple, though poorer, was still a place of worship. And David's throne, though cracked, still supported a king. All this because at key moments, the right word came at the right time and changed everything. Shemaiah's actions did not create fame. They created margin. They created space. He did not rebuild walls, but he prevented them from being destroyed. He did not plant victories, but he prevented defeats that would have ended the history of Judah. He was like that hidden root that keeps the tree alive even when the trunk cracks. And the most curious thing is that no one celebrated this at the time. The people wanted to see great victories, united kingdoms, wealth like in the days of Solomon. But what Shemaiah left behind was something else. Discernment, a kind of warning that passed from mouth to mouth, from generation to generation, even without his name being mentioned. And when you think about what would have happened if he hadn't spoken, it's impossible not to imagine chaos. A civil war at the beginning of Rehoboam's reign would have turned into tragedy. The people would have destroyed each other, and perhaps they would never have recovered. The line of David could have been wiped out right there, but it wasn't. Because someone said no when everyone else expected yes. Because someone listened to God when others cried out for power. And even though no one realized it at the time, that choice changed history. Think about it. If Shemaiah had ignored that first command from God, if he had thought, "That's not my business," or "Who am I to mess with the king?" perhaps Rehoboam's army would have marched against the north, and the people, who were already divided in their hearts, would have been divided in blood as well. Brother against brother, tribe against tribe, a bloodbath soon after Solomon's death, and without Judah, without the lineage of David, without the temple, what would have been left? The greater plan would have been interrupted right there on a battlefield that never even existed. And all because of a silence that, thank God, never happened. But Shemaiah spoke. And not only did he speak, he spoke with courage. He did not seek prominence. He did not seek reward. He did not even expect his name to be remembered for long. He was like a candle lit in the dark. It did not last forever, but it shone brightly enough to prevent a fatal stumble. And perhaps that is what makes his story so powerful. Because Shemaiah does not appear performing miracles, he is not followed by crowds, he does not perform great signs. But even so, his words change the destiny of an entire nation, and that raises another even more disturbing question. How many times does God still choose people like this, simple, discreet, unexpected, to prevent tragedies that no one else sees coming? The story of Shemaiah, even though told in just a few verses, carries more weight than many long biographies. Because what matters is not how much he appeared, but how much he interfered in the course of what seemed inevitable. The story of Shemaiah teaches without shouting. He didn't appear often, but every time he did, it was at a crucial moment. And when he spoke, it wasn't to please anyone, it was to align the people with what God wanted to say. He didn't try to convince with beautiful arguments, nor did he use fear to manipulate. He just spoke the truth as he received it and let it do what it needed to do. The first lesson is this: obeying at the right time can prevent tragedies that will never be told. Because if Rehoboam had ignored what Shemaiah said, we would have a different story. But he listened, and that's why everything went on. Sometimes someone's victory is not in fighting, but in giving up the right fight at the right time. Another thing that stands out is how God chose someone who was not famous, not royalty, not great in the eyes of the people. Shemaiah was an ordinary man who became extraordinary only because he decided to be faithful. This shows that God does not need a stage. He needs willingness. He needs people who listen and act, who understand that being an instrument is more important than being known. And finally, there is one truth that runs through everything. Shemaiah's mission was not to leave a name, but an impact. He appears, speaks, writes, and disappears. But what he did continued to shape history even after. His voice was silenced. This teaches us that we will not always see the fruits of what we plant, but if what we do comes from God, it will bear fruit, even in silence. The story ends there, with Shemaiah leaving the scene. But the mark he left behind, that continues to echo every time someone decides to listen to the right voice at the right time. If you enjoyed the story of Shemaiah and want to continue following other stories of faith and overcoming adversity, be sure to like this video and share it with your loved ones. And of course, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any new content. Together, we will explore more powerful lessons from the Bible.